Hey everyone, welcome to Body Language. This is a video podcast that aims to dissect the intricacies of the human body. I'm Neha, and I've always been fascinated by the human body and its continual pursuit of keeping us alive. I'm by no means an expert, and I'm actually a really big fan of keeping things simple. So, with the help of doctors and specialists in the field, this podcast aims to break down the complexities that surround medical sciences into something more digestible for everyone. I hope you enjoy. If you take a minute right now to stop whatever you're doing, pause this video, sit in complete silence, and just observe your thoughts. What do you observe? What kind of thoughts come to mind? Is it one very strong thought? Many different thoughts all at once? Or maybe even a train of thought that leads you from one to another? When we allow ourselves this moment of introspection, we often find a cacophony of thoughts vying for attention. Worries about the future, memories of the past, and many fleeting ideas that seem to dart in and out of our consciousness. Stopping and observing your thoughts is becoming increasingly more important. The thoughts that we observe when we sit in silence are very important. This is because we know that they are not caused by any external distractions around us, because we're sat in silence. So they have to be caused by what's going on up here, the inner workings of our own minds. Each thought that arises during this moment of stillness provides valuable insight into our true beliefs, desires, and even fears. It's basically your mind on autopilot. When given a break from stimulation and distraction, these thoughts are the ones that repeatedly cross your mind. These thoughts are the ones that your mind is automatically giving its precious attention to. It's important to know that these thoughts that repeatedly cross your mind are not random at all. They are there for a reason, and that reason is called neuroplasticity. Basically, your brain is plastic. I don't mean it's made of plastic, I mean it behaves plastically, in that it has this ability to change and adapt. It does this by making new neural connections or rewiring the existing ones. Neuroplasticity is the fascinating phenomenon that underscores the incredible malleability of our brains. Think of it as the architect of our mental landscape, continually redesigning and renovating these intricate pathways that govern our thoughts, emotion, and behaviors. It's a dynamic process that allows our brains to adapt and evolve in response to our experiences, whether positive or negative. And the best thing about neuroplasticity is that we control it. Our intentional, repeated thoughts and actions are what cause neuroplasticity to occur in the first place. I'll illustrate this with an example of neuroplasticity that I personally really like. Take playing the piano. The more you play the piano, the better you become at it. And that's neuroplasticity in action. Your brain grows accustomed to the patterns and movements required for playing the piano, forming new neural connections and strengthening the existing ones in the areas of the brain that are associated with motor skills and coordination. This helps you become a better piano player. If you were to look at the brain of a pianist, you would find an omega-like sign on the motor areas of both hemispheres of the brain. Here, an omega sign on the brain is just an indication of a larger hand motor area with more neural connections. And this simply means that the part of the brain has adapted to making better use of your hands, which makes sense as you're more efficient at using them to play the piano. A 2009 study showed that piano players develop an omega sign on both hemispheres of the brain, whereas violin players develop an omega sign on only their right hemisphere. This is proof of neuroplasticity. Firstly, you need to know that the right hemisphere of your brain controls the left side of your body, and your left hemisphere controls the right side of your body. Knowing this, it's very simple. Pianists make heavy use of both of their left and right hands, so it makes sense that both hemispheres will develop an omega sign on the respective motor areas. However, violinists make way more use of their left hand and less of their right. So equally, it makes sense that their motor area on their right hemisphere will be the one to develop this omega sign. For both pianists and violinists, we can see that their brains have adapted to playing their respective instruments by making the necessary changes in structure to increase the motor coordination. This proves neuroplasticity because there are different motor demands for each of the instruments, which is reflected in the way that the brain changes its structure for each instrument differently. So that's a very basic explanation of how neuroplasticity works. I also want to bring attention to how neuroplasticity can also govern our thoughts and feelings. Our brains being plastic not only shapes our abilities and behaviors, but also influences our thoughts and emotions. When we repeatedly engage in certain thought patterns or emotional responses, our brains undergo these structural and functional changes to accommodate these tendencies, just like the omega sign with the piano players. This means that the more we think a certain way or feel a particular emotion, the more entrenched these patterns become in our neural circuitry. Essentially, the easier it becomes to naturally resort to this pattern of thinking. For example, if someone consistently thinks of negative stuff, their brain may become wired to default to these negative patterns, leading to this predisposition towards worry or sadness. This is essentially making nervous, sad thoughts a habit. I guess you could even go as far as calling it an addiction. Each time you think negatively, you use that neural connection. Just like how the hand motor areas get strengthened when someone plays the piano, this negative connection becomes stronger when you think negatively. As the connection grows stronger, it becomes easier and easier to naturally use that neural pathway. It becomes the path of least resistance. Your brain will opt for whichever pathway is easiest to fire, which then becomes this negative pathway. Linking back to those autopilot thoughts that I talked about at the beginning of the episode, if the structure of your brain is wired to make negative thoughts easy to access, when you sit in silence, these negative thoughts are the ones that will come to you. This is just a thought, but maybe this is why today most people struggle to just sit in silence without consuming some form of media to distract themselves from these autopilot thoughts. If you have 5 spare minutes, most probably you will fill the time by checking your phone. This basically keeps your brain busy and reduces your chance for introspection. Ultimately, harnessing the power of neuroplasticity requires commitment, patience, and self-discipline. If you take one thing away from this video, pay attention to your thoughts, especially these autopilot ones. They are truly indicative of what's going on inside your mind. And I really believe that you can learn a lot about yourself just by being more observant of your thoughts. Remember, your thoughts have the power to shape your reality, so choose them wisely and with intention. Hopefully you found this useful and the concept struck a chord with you. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider subscribing. And thank you very much for watching or listening.